Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl. I currently am the Vice President of the Interreligious Council of Linn County. On this morning's show, we're going to talk about revitalizing Iowa's small communities. And here to help me kind of navigate this topic this morning, I have three distinguished guests with me. I'd like you to just take maybe about 30 seconds or so, introduce yourself, and tell us why this particular topic is important to you.
I'm Josh Pope, the mayor of the city of Elkader, and I think that it's important that we know how important the small towns are in our community, and I think I'm here to learn stuff, and so hopefully we can go from there.
All right, thank you for coming.
Tracy Achenbach, I'm the housing director for the East Central Iowa Council of Governments, and I've been working with small towns for over 25 years, and so it's important to me that they stay vibrant and are an important part of the fabric of Iowa.
Thank you, Tracy.
And I'm Tony Bedard. I'm the CEO of Frontier Co-op, and my interest in this is really that as an employer, we have about 575 total employees, 500 of which are here in Iowa. Most of those are here in rural Iowa, so we're committed to the well-being of the Iowa, and our three of our four plants are located in the rural part of the state, and just making sure that we have a vibrant kind of workforce that comes from the state of Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of different directions we could go with this. I think, Tony, we were talking just before the show about you grew up in a small town outside of Waterloo, I believe, and we talked about how just a lot of our small towns here in Iowa are shrinking, right? For a variety of reasons, the population is declining. So there's just kind of a basic question maybe I'll start with. Maybe it's a tough question, but we'll see if you're up to it. But is it necessary that all of Iowa's towns survive, or are some of them just going to go the way of the traditional family farm, right, where they've consolidated, they've disappeared essentially, right, as people move to more urban centers? Is there an argument to be made for maybe certain towns surviving and others, it's inevitable they won't? And is it important that all of them survive, some of them survive? What's your thought? Anybody can jump in on this one. I
would say that I've heard this talked at like really small communities. While the community itself is really important to the members of the community, it also may be a community where they just don't have the life in them to be progressive and forward thinking and doing things. So I'm not sure. I probably was telling communities 25 years ago, you need to think to the future. You can't sit here and just let things happen to you, because if you do, you are not going to be here in the future. Or I've worked with communities who lost their elementary school, and then slowly everything started shutting down in the communities. I don't know, I wouldn't want to make the judgment that the absolute smallest communities may necessarily not be necessary, but I think it's up to the leadership in the community or the members of the community to make sure that it is going to thrive and it is going to stay in place. I don't know.
I might agree with you that leadership and behind the leader, the volunteers of the community, the people of the community make the community what it is. And a lot of times that it's a certain lifestyle that people are looking for is why they've belong to that community. And but you still have to have the necessities for people to survive. You got to have a gas station, you got to have groceries, you got to have, so those are things that I think are important for those communities.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that it's pretty tough to think that all communities are going to survive.
Right.
It's people are leaving rural America, they're going to the cities. It doesn't matter if it's Iowa, the nation, the world. It's a factor. I think it's not a picking and choosing, which in my mind, which ones survive. It's those that can have a strong economic foundation, that have a vibrancy to their community, whether it be through the social network and the people. But they'll big or small. I don't think it's going to be predicated. I don't think it's scale alone. It's got but it's got to have some common denominators. And as somebody who tries to operate a business in the rural communities, I think the economics. If you're more than 45 miles out of a major city, you're going to have employment, or there will not be vibrancy. There's no way to support yourself, and that's a statement.
And one of the things I've heard at city council meetings over the years when I've attended different city council meetings in different communities is, if they need to provide services and their population keeps shrinking, well, guess what? They don't have the revenue to be able to provide those services. So it gets to a point where it becomes about economics, because it's just not going to be viable. But I think that communities, it is up to them. I really do think it's up to them whether they're going to just go away, or if they're going to stay in place in some way.
So I'm thinking here recently of the two small towns that I had been to, Solon and Kelowna. Now, I'm not sure what this says about me, but the two reasons I went to both of those was for their downtown brewery. And that seems to be a common thing with some of these towns. I mean, Solon is now becoming a very vibrant community, a small, vibrant community. It does have some unique characteristics in the sense that it does have that vibrant downtown district. It has the brewery. But it's also, strategically located, right, by Iowa City and North Liberty that's growing, and obviously Cedar Rapids. And Kelowna similar, right, and it has an identity with its Amish heritage and a close proximity to Iowa City. So a couple questions. Is it really key for some of these smaller towns to be located next to or near a larger metropolitan area like Iowa City or Cedar Rapids? And then number two, what are some of the key venues that these cities need to have in order to attract entrepreneurs, for instance, young people, but again, just to sustain their population and their economic base?
So I talk first to the location issue, and I'll let you guys talk about some of the services and the community itself. In our business, if you're 30 or 35 miles away, you're probably not going to drive that. Now, there are people who drive a lot farther in all kinds of businesses. So that's the advantages. In fact, I would venture a guess that there is a lot more for people like Solon and Kelowna, any of these kind of cities around that perimeter of these major metropolitan areas. They probably have a lot more to offer than even the cities that they're next to, because they can offer a little more sense of community. They can offer that kind of eclectic kind of environment, whatever that personality that city would be like. But they're first and foremost, they're 30 miles or 12 miles or 15 miles from major employers. And it gets tough when you go 60 miles out or 90 miles. When you're talking about some of these communities, they have to have their own business engine in order for them to kind of create the rest of these things.
I agree, but in our aspect in Elkader, you look at Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, Waterloo, they're all an hour and a half away from us. So we don't have that big city around there. So we are the big city in the area. So we have to produce the businesses. We have to provide. We just have a brewery just opened up in town, and that's hopefully going to help draw back the millennials that have left, and then they come back and raise their family in a small town. But we have to provide that nightlife for them to survive too. That's one of the amenities that we need to provide. But you also have to have the churches, the grocery stores, the gas stations, and then recreation. But then that employer that's going to pay that sustainable wage that can make you be able to survive and own your home and like society today.
Yeah, and I think a place like Elkader is you're right. You almost have to be that hub, and if you are, then the advantages go outward from that community too. So a little bit like a hub and spoke kind of thing. But if you have to stretch too far and nobody's got that economic engine, then the whole sort of region it's got its challenges.
Right.
But I would say too that I think that communities can survive about an hour away from a metro area if necessary, because people
Yeah.
are willing to drive, and especially if they have a good school system and it's a vibrant community, I think that people would be willing to drive further.
And that shows the success of Elkader.
And you can look south of Kelowna to Washington to know that, right? Because Washington, I think I have heard say that, their largest employer is University of Iowa hospitals or the University of Iowa. So, people are willing to make that drive. So, and they survive. And Washington's a very, that's a vibrant community as well.
Yeah. So Josh, when you gave me your mayor card, and I'm not sure if everybody can see it, but very, very nice. And it says, "Life can be this good," talking about Elkader. And that's the town slogan, correct?
Right, correct.
And so what if I go to your website, what am I seeing there that is going to be the selling point for Elkader that makes me want to move there?
I think that a lot of things is we have the vibrancy and we have a lot of things to offer. We have the trails, we have the Whitewater Park, we have our own hospital, school. I mean, everything is there intact. So as we continue to want to expand, and have businesses, then we need housing. And one of the biggest drawbacks of Elkader is that we're in the valley between bluffs. So where do you go out with housing?
Right. Yeah. You're kind of
We're kind of locked in the bluffs.
bluff
And-
locked. I don't know if that's a word.
Bluff lock. But we are fortunate that we do have the staples intact, and everything is running smoothly, and everything's going well.
And it's a beautiful spot. I mean,
Oh,
don't get me wrong. It's a very beautiful spot.
It's
and,
awesome.
and it really is, and that's a big selling point in and of itself. But so it sounds like obviously there's some key things that we need, right? Just to conduct life, we need grocery stores, gas stations, hospitals, but we also need these things that bike trails, et cetera, that different, especially the younger generations looking for.
Correct.
Tony, one of the things we talked about earlier was maybe with some of these more remote bedroom communities that maybe just don't have all of these amenities, but people just love this living, small town living. How much technology can help employers to employ some of those people that want to live and work in these communities through just remote, being able to work remotely. And as the technology is increased, it's becoming more feasible. And obviously with the unemployment rate as it is in Iowa and throughout the nation, companies are having to kind of think outside of the box with that. Could you talk a little bit about maybe Frontier's approach to working remotely, or your opinion on it, and how you think that could help you sit?
For a lot of the reasons you just said, my opinion and our company's approach has changed quite dramatically. Now, we've had people work off-site for 20 years, but it was a real exception, and it's becoming less of an exception. So I've been able to hire people in jobs, whether it be things like customer service or technical jobs or marketing jobs, where they can interface with their company through technology and not have to be there. And we've actually had we've had an employee who moved specifically to Iowa, into rural Iowa, that was working in a job where they were in an office, but they could find that they can come and live in rural Iowa and then access a job with us in a way that they find the rural life a better life. And you couldn't do that without high-speed internet. And honestly, necessity is the mother of invention. So you're going to be more open to that in this environment. With the 2.6% unemployment rate, you've got to think outside the box. And honestly, with millennials, there's almost an expectation of that flexibility. So it all works. It works together. It does. You have to change the way you manage. You have to change the way your expectation, of what the start and end of the workday is. But it's critical. I think it's going to be critical to anybody's success, whether you're in rural Iowa or you're in a big city. You go that route. But it's an advantage. I think it's going to be an advantage because places like Elkader and these communities can offer something those big cities can't, and individuals can then access those jobs and not have to live in that big city.
So the internet is a challenge for a lot of communities in rural Iowa, that if they don't have high-speed internet, it's a problem.
Yeah.
They just can't attract the businesses to be able to come there. They might have a community that people would want to live in, but they're also going to have to, then the folks that live there are going to have to be willing to drive to work because they can't bring the businesses in that would locate there because of that limitation they have with high-speed internet, the lack of it.
We found that as a big hurdle. When we bought the facility in Belle Plaine, we didn't have high-speed internet there. And we knew we had to bring it there. We were prepared to, put some real money towards that. Fortunately, the utilities and our providers worked together to make that happen. But it's not, rural communities need that more, it's not just to watch Netflix anymore,
Right.
okay? You got to have high-speed internet to
That
actually
helps
do
with the
business.
quality of life.
Yeah,
right.
it's it doesn't matter, it doesn't hurt you for quality of life, but you can, farmers need that technology, businesses need it, and so there are basic fundamentals beyond, sewer and water and roads. The high-speed internet is it's a basic staple for a vibrancy.
And Elkader is very fortunate because nearly 10 years ago, we had our local internet provider put in fiber optics. So we've had, high-speed internet for many,
You're
many,
way
many
ahead
years.
of the curve.
So, and we've had several tech companies come down. You don't ever see the employees because they live in their homes and they're whatever, but they do operate out of Elkader. We've even had people come from California and have their business there that's all strictly on the internet just because we're in the fibers.
Yep.
So I want to kind of go a little different direction now. This, is around the shrinking population in some of these centers, but also how that's been offset by an influx of immigrants, specifically Latinos, into Iowa. So Iowa has seen a dramatic increase in its Latino population. In fact, over the last 30 years, and it's expected to grow to nearly 450,000 in the next 30 years, to 13% of Iowa's population. So I was asked, the question is very simply, are immigrants key to the survival, and as we're talking about revitalization of Iowa's small towns long term, when it comes to a viable workforce, right? I mean, you can have, employers need workers, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Elkader hasn't seen much influx in immigration, so my experience, I can't say it's key to the survival because we are surviving without. Not to say that we wouldn't welcome them, because we are very welcoming to people to come in to provide that workforce to make us grow.
So I've, probably 15 years ago, I wrote a lot of housing studies for a lot of communities and counties. I was working up near Waterloo in north central Iowa, and then the difference was the communities, when I would compare population over decades through the census, communities did not realize how much they would have shrunk had they not had an influx of Latinos. The Latinos, I have said for a long time, they're the saving grace for a lot of communities in Iowa, and rural Iowa especially, because that has been what's allowed them to either maintain or slightly grow, just a very small percentage, but at least they're not seeing a decrease in population like other communities have, other than Elkader, of course.
Tony?
So I think it's a little bit of, a little bit of the chicken and the egg. I think that in our case, I'll give you our example, we actually have a lot more, immigrants working in our plant than we ever had before. Part of that is that there's less people in the community that aren't immigrants, right? There's less people that want to work in a factory. My guess is those kind of communities that brought in immigrant population, there's a real need for their work that other people weren't willing to do, and so. I think it's about not to beat the drum too hard here, but I think that economic engine, however that comes, creates wealth that puts churches and schools and hospitals and grocery stores in there, and that, you know, those immigrants are there to fill a need that isn't being fed, whether it's a big dairy operation or if it's a manufacturing plant. We found ourselves really trying to honestly stretch into that population because we struggled not in the Belle Plaine area, because we found a lot of good employees there, but we struggled to fill some of our spots. And so you have to think differently, whether it's remote, whether, you know, we've got the refugee population. I can go on and talk about things that we're doing with the homeless population. There's a lot of different, you just have to be creative. But immigrants are definitely people who have shown both an aptitude and a desire to work in some of the tougher jobs that less of our youth today in rural Iowa are willing to take on as a career.
And I think, and I would go further to say that I think communities, if communities aren't welcoming and aren't willing, because I've worked in too many communities where there will be a comment made. You know, it will be a mayor, not Elkader's mayor, but it will be a mayor that will say to me, well, you know, we don't really want those people here. Or I've had people who I worked with in a community would even say to me, well, you know, we have a lot of potential for crime because we've had all of these people move in here. And it's really, but they're also the ones that have kept the community vital and have helped it to grow. And I don't think that it was necessarily any crime related to it, but that's a perception that a lot of people have.
So as I was researching this, and there's studies been done, and obviously there's organizations that help that look at this, and you know, one of the things is just the integration of these populations into what were not diverse populations, as you can imagine, in small town Iowa. And all of a sudden, if you're a town of 5,000 and you have 500 immigrants move in, you know, and potentially next door or whatever, these, maybe if they're coming from Mexico or Latin America or wherever, you know, one of the simple things was teaching them that, you know, in Iowa, we value cutting your grass every week, right? Whereas some of them maybe came from a part of the world where nobody, you know, they didn't have grass to grow. And this was not something that was culturally embedded. And so teaching them those things to help kind of integrate. And then obviously, as generations stay, they assimilate more and more.
Yeah.
But what are, I mean, I've already mentioned a couple things, but I mean, Tracy, I feel like you have some insight into this. What are some of the ways that leaders within these communities can help kind of integrate these, this population?
You know, what comes to my mind is maybe having celebrations in the community that are around their culture so that folks who aren't part of that culture can maybe learn about it. I think also, I don't know, as a mayor, I would think that a community would want to offer maybe classes or encourage the local library or somewhere in the community to be able to offer classes. I think the absolutely last thing that a community would want to do is have their leadership saying, well, we don't really want those people here.
And
it has to be just the opposite.
In that word, those people.
Yes, Working in affordable housing, those are two words I just love. I hear all the time.
Well, and I think that's important to get them involved. You know, get them on that program, get them on that Main Street program, get them involved in the community events that are going on. Now, we're fortunate that we're named after a famous Algerian hero. So we have that culture coming from Algeria come in to visit Elkader. We have celebrations of the Algerians when they come in. And so with that, we're diversified a little bit on different cultures and understanding their culture, and they have to come in and understand our culture. So I think Elkader is fortunate that we have a lot of that already in place, and so we, you know, are able to work with that. So if we do get an influx of some immigrants, we'll have a better base to start with.
I don't think, in business, I don't think is much different than the community. It's about integrating people into your culture, you know, bringing them in. You know, some of what we have to facilitate is, you know, translation things, but also leadership. You have to look at integrating your leadership. And my guess is in a community, you'd want to do the same kind of thing. If they're going to be vibrant, you want people who are just not occupying space there, but they're being part of the community, whether they're leaders, you know, civic leaders, whether they're volunteers, whatever. And I think in our company, it's not much different. If you find that you haven't figured out how to way to engage them and to put people in management that look and sound and act a little bit more like they do, then you're not going to be fully integrating them, and they're not going to be fully productive and engaged in your business. And I'm assuming that's the same for a community.
Yeah.
So.
But I also think from the other side of just the folks who are in the community being welcoming, and I was reading an article just because I was thinking about this topic, and just smiling at people in the community, that it makes people feel like they're welcome there and that they're wanted there, and so it's while it's important to integrate them in the community, it's also important for the people who live in the community to be welcoming to them.
And I think
other
you
cultures.
see that in a lot of rural communities. You can go to a rural community and never been there before, and people are waving at you.
Yeah.
You know, I think you see that a lot in the rural, where you come into Cedar Rapids and they're like this, you know, or they've got this on their steering wheel. You know, I mean, they're not paying attention.
Yeah. So we have about 3 or 4 minutes left here. So there was a study done here recently. Iowa State University actually did a study, and what they found was that certain towns between like 500 and 10,000, if they're adopting what they call a shrink smart strategy, which is this idea that even though your population may be declining, there's a way to do it smartly, lack of a better term. And one of those is attracting jobs that may be kind of entry-level construction jobs, stuff that doesn't maybe require a college degree, may be attractive to an immigrant population, right? Like that's a way to kind of still maintain. But what he said is there's two things they found that really didn't require much investment necessarily, but one of them is we've already been talking about socially involved citizens. Right. So this was about creating diverse and inclusive networks that tie residents together across demographic and economic lines. And the associate professor there found that, in quote, encouraging a more open and welcoming atmosphere in a community may go a long way toward boosting quality of life, regardless of potentially expensive new investments. So maybe just a quick, what are some things that Elkader does in that sense to kind of bind the community together, to whether it's annual events? Is there anything you can...
We have several events all the time, and we have a lot of different organizations. You know, our Main Street. All the different, boy, put me on the spot.
No, it's
service organizations.
Service organizations. We've got a lot of organizations that do different things, whether it's small or large.
Sure.
We have, you know, the Sweet Corn Days. They're our annual event. We do the Algerian celebration. Just different events all the time that we're continuing drawing volunteers for. And some of the events, like the Sweet Corn Days event, I mean, it takes hundreds of volunteers to get that event to go off, you know, to make it go perfectly. Art in the Park is another one that we have. That's been a huge growing event, and those are hundreds of volunteers. I mean, maybe not hundreds, but there are lots of thousands, in a town of 1,200. A lot of volunteers that make that go off.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation, one that I've been looking forward to for several weeks now, and I appreciate everybody coming out on this cold day and having this great conversation with me, and I hope the viewers have appreciated it as well, and I hope you have a great Sunday morning. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Take care.